Hello everyone, welcome back to some Call of Duty DFS Slate breakdown for January the 29th, day number 3 of the final week of Major 2 qualifiers. So, going to be going on a little bit of a break after this one, but, it is what it is. Ended out yesterday actually doing pretty well. Going through a quick recap, we had 4-3-1s, some of them went our way. Obviously, this is the big one here. Seattle got the upset over New York, and the pieces I talked about yesterday and loved, Sib and Pred, ended up coming through. I believe Sib ended up being like sub 5% or something. I think Pred was like 16% owned, and I think one of the contests I checked, I didn't check them all, but plus 29, plus 23, just gigantic games here from these guys. Had the feeling that, this would be the possibility of that happening, and it ended up coming through. So that's something you love to see. We got the feeling right on that one. Finally got something going our way, and hopefully we can build on it. Ended up cashing pretty well, mainly through these two as the big catalyst. The other one we were very right on, Boston in versus Florida. Ended up going with Awakening and Vivid. I didn't have Vivid in my lineup, but I definitely recommended him, so I'm pretty glad to see how well he did. Awakening did as well. Again, another 3-1. They ended up winning all the respawns. Or they lost the first one, but they ended up doing well enough. So, again, another series that we were kind of hit the nail on the head on. So I'm very pleased to when that happens. Definitely something we take for sure. One we ended up getting wrong, and unfortunately kind of killed something that could have been great, was this optic lineup. Ended up losing to Vegas Legion in every respawn game mode. They ended up winning the Search and Destroy. Just the complete opposite of what I expected. I guess it kind of just is what it is sometimes, but this one is just sad, kind of, to be honest. Optic should really just never be losing here to Vegas Legion, especially in these respawn game modes. It's just borderline embarrassing on their part, in my opinion. And in the first series of the day, one we had very little. Whoops, I didn't mean to close it. One we had very little exposure to, Toronto versus LAG. I ended up not having anyone in this series in my lineups, but again, it kind of went the direction we anticipated. Standy ended up being Standy and Kleenex, especially Kleenex. Kleenex had an amazing series, but overall, Toronto was the right side of it. The series went kind of about as expected. LAG won the first hard point. Then Toronto took over the series pretty handedly from that point on. But again, the problem or the reasoning that we avoided this series ended up coming to fruition. The fact that LAG was kind of splitting these hard points and stuff. So that's something to keep in mind. So I think overall we had a pretty solid read on the games yesterday. Quick look ahead to tomorrow. Going to be pretty interesting. The odds are already moving. I'm recording this very, very soon after the Seattle series. So these Seattle odds are probably going to continue to move, but that's something to keep in mind. I'd expect Seattle goes to like a minus 150 or something after blowing out New York today. So that's something we're gonna kind of keep in mind as we go on. When I checked these odds like a couple minutes ago, I think it was minus 115 both sides. So I think the odds are already moving towards Seattle. It's gonna be pretty interesting. Wow, the juice on this Boston LAT series is like borderline illegal. Minus 120, minus 115. That is diabolical juice. And the third series up, Atlanta FaZe versus Optic Texas. These are pretty interesting matchups. These are all very close odds-wise. I think they're pretty close game-wise. I'm pretty excited for these series. I think I'm gonna have some hot takes here. But yeah, we love close odds series. They make for interesting chats and stuff. So it's something to look forward to. We'll go ahead and start out with Minnesota versus Seattle. Obviously, Seattle ended up performing very, very well for us today. If you guys did end up following in that direction, I know you guys probably did well as well. So that's something I'm excited for. But they have a little bit of a different challenge here, I guess, when we do talk about this series. I don't know. I think as a kind of philosophy thing here, I'm going to end up going back over to the Minnesota side. The main reason and the big catalyst, of course, was picking Seattle versus New York was we know the upside and the potential that Sib and Pred have as individual players. It ended up coming through, obviously, in spades. It's something we're very happy with, obviously, when we are on the right side of it. However, again, we just have to look back and kind of recognize and realize when this Seattle team does poorly, things can go off the rails pretty quickly as well. I think people are going to try and piggyback and kind of ride off this Sib and Pred performance. And I think it's just a solid spot, I think, to pivot away from. I think we've been seeing some pretty solid performances from a couple of the Minnesota players as well, especially when we look at somebody like Afro. I'm willing to just kind of go to the other side of that. Again, the concern here is the fact that Seattle's actually been very solid in these respawn game modes. The problem here is that the pricing is the way it is. Wow. I didn't realize the pricing and the pricing on Seattle is so crazy here. Sib at 11K, Pred at 10.6, Mac and accuracy are down at 4.8 and 4K. That's pretty crazy. The discrepancy there is definitely something I've never seen before. I guess it kind of makes sense with how condensed the kills have been for them, but still, either way. Again, I don't know. It's going to be tough to get away from Sib and Pred. These numbers that they have in these respawn game modes is pretty incredible. These numbers might even be going up for Sib at 1.4 and Pred at a 1.3 in hardpoint. They might be even getting better, which is crazy considering that they won both of the hardpoints today and both look very strong in them. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll kind of leave this one as a little bit of an unknown for now. Maybe if we do find the salary in a little bit later of a series, if we find some cheapies that we like later, maybe we can turn around and get to Sib and Pred. But at this price tag, I'm willing to go the other way and look at some of the Minnesota guys. Again, I think Afro 8.4 is a very solid option. He's been playing pretty well. Attach maybe would be the second option from Minnesota, and then Bance at 5.6K, he would be an option as well. Obviously, we've seen him. He's been doing pretty poorly, I think, for the most of the year, but he's had a couple decent performances, and obviously that price tag of 5.6K, very, very cheap. If you wanted to go that direction as well. So for now, I'm going to be leaning towards Minnesota, but I definitely see this series as being very close either direction. So if we do find the salary later on in the slate, I'm definitely willing to look at Sib and Pred. I think obviously just the individual performance that they have is pretty crazy, and I'm not necessarily scared of Minnesota either way. But obviously the potential is there. We've seen it with Seattle losing the first three series of this stage. So there's definitely an argument to be made for both ways. So we'll kind of put a pin in this one for now and continue on. The next one up is Boston versus LA Thieves. At first glance, I already have a pretty strong opinion of where we're going with this one. Obviously, when we look at the odds here, it's going to be pretty indicative that Boston is going to be kind of the decently sized favorite, at least in the hard points. The control is slightly favored towards LA Thieves, and so are the Search and Destroys. This one is pretty interesting. Obviously, LA Thieves are still having the substitute in. They still have Capsule in for Kenny, I believe. So that's something to keep in mind. I do believe the idea is that Kenny will be back for the Major 2 LAN. But nonetheless, I'm pretty interested in this series. Obviously, we have Boston, who's just continuing to dominate their hard points and their respawn game modes. Obviously, I think they won another 3 of them. They lost one hard point, won one hard point, and they won a control. So they're 5-2 in hardpoint, 3-1 in control. Over on the LA Thieves side, 2-4 in hardpoint, 2-2 in control. This one is tough. My initial lean was I definitely wanted to get to the LA Thieves side, but if you look at just how well Boston has been playing in these respawn game modes, it's just too hard to ignore. I'm probably going to end up just leaning towards the Boston side in this one. We'll look at the pricing here. It's relatively spread out. Vivid at 6.4 underpriced, Methods at 7.2 relatively underpriced, Awakening at 10.4. Again, that's a tough number to get to, but it's kind of, understandable with how consistent he's been performing. So I'm willing to go back to Boston again here. Again, I think it's a pretty similar story to kind of exactly what I was talking about yesterday, so I don't want to kind of just repeat myself too much here, but just the numbers that they have in these respawn game modes is too hard to ignore. I think they're relatively too cheap here as well, especially Vivid and Methods. Yeah, it's just a place that it's too hard to get away from, in my opinion, especially just with LA Thieves, how poor that they've been looking. The one caveat I will say with LA is that they lost to New York, LAG, and Toronto, 3 pretty solid teams. Obviously, they beat the brakes off of London, but obviously we know London is probably the worst team in the league right now, definitely bottom 2. So that's kind of the problem, is we don't have a solid opinion of where LA Thieves are, especially just with Capsule in instead of Kenny. So just added all that stuff together, I'm just going to go with the Boston side. I don't love it going. I feel like this will be relatively chalky, but it is what it is. You just kind of have to take the plays that make sense and add them together. The last one up is pretty interesting. We have Optic Texas coming off of their poor performance today against Vegas Legion, and then going up against the Atlanta FaZe. I don't know why I closed the odds thing, but obviously I believe Atlanta FaZe was like minus 140, minus 150, Optic Texas plus 110 or something of the sort. This one is pretty interesting. Obviously, we have Optic Texas coming off of the bad performance versus Vegas Legion, losing every respawn versus one of the worst respawn teams in the game. I don't know. This one is tough. This one really is tough. My initial lean is I want to go towards the Optic Texas side, almost in a similar but not quite as expressive vein as to why we went with Seattle yesterday. Obviously, we don't have the same condensed kill share with Optic as we do have with Seattle, but I think the sentiment is mostly still the same. We have a team that I think is kind of at the lowest point that you could buy them at. They obviously have the problem of their players being swapped out. Obviously, Scumpy leaving, they bring back Dashy. It just seems like there's a lot of kind of like external factors when it comes to this Optic Texas team. Obviously, they were winning before that, and they had some quality wins in here as well. Toronto, Seattle, and Boston are no slouches. But that loss to Vegas Legion, I just think people are going to maybe overreact a little bit to one game. The other kind of flip side of that same coin is that it was yesterday. It's hard to respond and kind of regather yourself off of a singular day performance. Maybe they're just gonna. I think they're gonna write it off. It's a bad day. You move on the next day. It is what it is. We have to get up and get ready for this FaZe matchup. That's what I am anticipating. It's just tough. Obviously, Atlanta FaZe are coming off of 2 pretty solid wins. They got swept by Minnesota themselves. But they beat LAG, New York, Seattle. They both beat pretty solid teams so far. FaZe obviously getting swept by Minnesota in there as well. I don't know. It's tough. You could definitely make a case either way. But my initial lean is I do want to go with Optic. We'll look at the pricing here. Illy and Hook are continuously very, very underpriced. Illy at 4.4, that is preposterous. Hook at 6K feels pretty much the same as well. I don't know. This one's tough. BZ at 8.8 also seems a little bit underpriced with how greatly he's been playing. But in my opinion, I'm just going to eat this super cheap Texas build, and I'm just going to go that direction. I'd imagine it's going to be pretty popular. Obviously, I think both Illy and Hook are underpriced here. But I think that makes a pretty good amount of sense. If I do want to get up to Sib and Pred, which I do feel the need to do, then getting down to like Illy and Hook at those insanely cheap numbers makes a lot of sense. And obviously I'm willing to still mix and match like 1 or 2 of these Boston pieces in there as well. If you want to look on the other side, if you wanted to be a little bit more of the contrarian, which I think makes some sense here, if you wanted to hypothetically go with like Afro Bants and then look at somebody like Celium and Abizi, I think that could put your lineup in a pretty unique and interesting spot. Obviously, we know how Call of Duty DFS has been. Logic would dictate that you want to just kind of take the lesser owned side of these things and kind of go with the leverage side, just because of how random this esport typically has been. I think that would definitely make a lot of sense, but for me, it just feels so tough to argue with the logic of how good Sib and Preda have been, and obviously Illy and Hook, and I think the bounce back spot there. So I don't know. I think there's a fair few ways you can go about it. Um, but I don't necessarily think that this Atlanta Texas game is going to be um, that one-sided when it comes to ownership. I would expect Sib and Pred to be relatively popular, and I think maybe people are going to end up taking the similar way of going Hook and Illy as well. So that's an argument you're going to have to make. I think, in my opinion, either way, I'm going to be ending up going on the Boston side. Kind of. Oh, geez. My apologies. I'm going to be going with Boston either way. You just have to decide what direction you want to go with these first and last matchups. For me, I don't know. It feels tough. Again, it just feels very difficult to argue with how well Sib and Pred have been, and then look at the price tags of Hook and Illy, and argue with those as well. Obviously, those have been, I think, their best two players when it comes to individual performance, as of so far. Illy Hook, Illy Shotzi Hook. So I don't know. It just feels like it is the obvious move. Sometimes the obvious move is the smartest because it makes the most sense. Getting in Sib and Pred, those insane individual players, looking at the value of Hook and Illy, it just feels hard to ignore. But again, sometimes in Call of Duty, all you want is the leverage, and the leverage side would definitely be Afro attach, maybe Afro and Bance, and then going with Celium Abizi, and then picking whatever Boston piece you want. So for now, I don't know. The problem here is that it just feels so hard to fade the Seattle guys. Maybe if the stats were a little bit closer between Seattle and Minnesota, it would make the choice a little bit easier. But it is so crazy how well Sib and Pred have been playing as of late. Let's look at Seattle. Obviously, Sib's numbers are not that great as of now, but we just saw how crazy they were earlier. Let's look at Minnesota. I mean, Afro's been playing well. Bance has been playing pretty well. Okay, I'm going to make my decision now. This is the direction I'm going to go. I think the obvious kind of quote-unquote like kind of cash game style build of what seems like you should be doing is going Sib, Pred, Illy, Hook, and then I don't know where the salary leaves you, but like whatever Boston piece you have left. That definitely seems like the direction to go. What the direction I'm going to be going is a similar style build, but I'm going to be going Afro, maybe Bance, maybe Attach, but definitely Afro. And then I'm going to pair them up with, I think, a BZ Celium, but although you could definitely make a case with whatever Atlanta guys you want to go with. And then Boston mix in there as well. I just feel like if everyone wants to ride this wave of Sib and Pred, we know that the team can have low lows as well as their high highs. I'm just going to go to the other side of that. And again, I think Atlanta, I just feel like, they have had some high performances as of late. I think we're just going to ride the Texas wave of maybe that, maybe yesterday wasn't a fluke. Maybe they are kind of just not been there yet. Maybe they're still a little bit overvalued. I'm just going to go with the phase side as well. Again, Awakening, Abizi, Celium's, Afro, maybe Bance, maybe Methods, maybe Attach. But for the most part, this is how my player pool is going to break down. I keep it relatively simple between probably these four: Afro, Abizi, Celium, Awakening, maybe Bance, maybe Methods, maybe Attach. I think those seem like pretty solid options in terms of what direction I want to go with. But of course, if you guys have different feelings, feel free to follow them. I don't have too much conviction on these games here outside of that Boston LA Thieves series. I do like that Boston side kind of no matter what. But again, we just talked about the different directions you could go outside of that. So I think that'll be it for me tonight. Keep this video a little bit short. I don't want to ramble too much. I do feel a little bit repetitive in these videos sometimes, just because the numbers don't change too much. Like, for example, we just talked about the reasons we liked Boston yesterday. They're very, very strong in these respawn game modes. There's not too much rehashing to be done for the same reason we liked them today. So, I'll try to keep these videos a little bit easier for you guys. So that'll be it for me tonight. Again, I don't know when I'll be back with Call of Duty, but hopefully we can turn our 1 day winning streak into a 2 day, decent finale. And maybe we'll be back for Major 2 LAN. I'm not sure how that stuff is looking for this Call of Duty, but whenever the next Call of Duty slate is, I'll be there as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. Best luck again tomorrow, and I'll see you guys when I see you.